Maybe you clicked out of curiosity, or maybe, without realizing it, you were looking for a quiet corner, a place where the words take their time, and even the silence is part of the story. I wrote this piece carefully, like stitching together memories, hurts, and little discoveries, hoping that somewhere in it, you might see a reflection of yourself. If that happens, even for a moment, stay. Listen as far as you'd like, and if you feel like it, leave a small sign that you are here. A word, a thought, even just, I'm here. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. If this story finds a place in you, share it with someone who might need it and keep the conversation alive. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, heavy cream paper with gold lettering that screamed money. Inside was a glossy invitation for Savannah's 26th birthday. Black tie dress code, live music, champagne reception. I almost laughed. Savannah was technically my cousin, but we'd never been close. She lived in a world of curated photos and champagne toasts, while I didn't. Still, it felt strange to be invited. I wasn't part of their inner circle. In truth, I'd only seen her family a handful of times over the last decade, at weddings, funerals, the occasional awkward holiday dinner. They were the type of family you'd expect to see in a lifestyle magazine. Symmetrical smiles, perfect posture, and a house that looked like it belonged to a luxury real estate ad. Everything about them was polished, except maybe the way they looked at each other when no one else was watching. I arrived at the party early because I didn't know what else to do. The backyard had been transformed into something out of a movie set. White linen tents draped in fairy lights, gold foil balloons, catering staff in crisp uniforms moving like clockwork. Guests floated around in designer dresses and tailored suits, clinking glasses, air-kissing. That's when I spotted her. Not Savannah. She was already in the center of the crowd, glowing in a fitted silk dress, sipping from a crystal flute. I mean her sister, the younger one. She stood near the edge of the patio, wearing last year's jeans and a blazer that didn't quite fit. Her smile didn't match the smiles around her. It was the look in her eyes that caught me. Not boredom, not even envy, but something like displacement. Like she was standing in a photograph she hadn't agreed to be part of. I didn't know much about her, except what I'd heard in passing. She'd lost her job 3 months earlier and had been staying at their parents' house until she got back on her feet. I'd overheard a family friend once joke, half knife, that she was living rent-free and responsibility-free. That night, I found out the truth was worse. She wasn't just staying there. She was being kept there on conditions. Conditions like, you'll show up, you'll smile, you'll nod, you'll clean up, and then you'll disappear. And tonight? Tonight, her attendance wasn't an act of love. It was an obligation. The longer I stood in that backyard, the more it felt like a stage play where everyone already knew their lines. Everyone except her. White tents rippled gently in the evening breeze, the smell of champagne and roses drifting between tables. String lights traced the tent poles like golden vines. The catering staff moved with the kind of precision that comes from fear of making a single mistake. Their faces were polite masks, but their shoulders were tight, as if they could feel the weight of being part of Savannah's show. Savannah herself floated from group to group like she was hosting a televised gala, every hair perfectly in place, her designer heels clicking softly on the patio stones. Wherever she went, conversations swelled with admiration. Savannah, you look stunning. Savannah, tell us about your work. You're going to be such an incredible lawyer. Her parents followed her with their eyes like she was the main event they'd been waiting for all year. Pride radiated from them like heat from a bonfire. And then there was her sister. I noticed it slowly, the way people's gazes slid past her, as if she were part of the furniture. When someone did look directly at her, it was usually with a polite nod or a quick smile that didn't reach the eyes. At one point, she stepped toward a circle of guests to join in a story. But before she could speak, Savannah's mother brushed a hand on her arm, guiding her away toward the buffet with a gentle but firm, "Why don't you check if the servers need anything?" It wasn't loud enough for everyone to hear, but I caught it, and I caught the faint flush in her cheeks as she obeyed. The conversations around me were glossy on the surface, but now and then, a comment sliced through. "At least one of you inherited the ambition," an uncle joked to Savannah, casting a sideways glance at her sister. "Some people are just more resilient than others," her father said, smiling as if it were a compliment. Each remark landed like a needle, small, precise, but sharp enough to pierce. She didn't react, at least not outwardly. Her expression stayed neutral, her posture careful. But from where I stood, I could see her fingers tightening around her glass. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just a birthday party. It was a performance, and her role in it? The reminder of what not to be. It happened so smoothly, so deliberately, that if you'd just arrived, you might have thought it was part of the evening's program. Savannah was in the center of the patio now, a glass of champagne in one hand, the other resting lightly on her hip. The crowd seemed to arrange itself around her without being told, the way birds instinctively wheel into formation. The music dimmed, and her mother gave a dainty tap against her own glass, a signal for silence. "First of all," Savannah began, her voice warm and honeyed, "thank you all for coming tonight. It means the world to me to be surrounded by friends and family, the kind of people who truly have their lives together." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the group. I was standing near the buffet table, phone in hand, taking a few shots of the floral arrangements for no reason other than they looked expensive. The gold-edged plates caught the string lights just right, and I framed a few angles while Savannah continued. Then, like a script she'd been rehearsing for weeks, she paused and turned. "And also," she said, her smile sharpening, "a special thanks to my favorite reminder of what not to become." The shift was subtle at first, a few heads tilting, eyes following her gaze. My stomach tightened before I even saw where she was looking. She raised her glass slightly and pointed, right at her sister. "Homeless," she said, her tone sweet but loud enough to carry across the lawn. "Get out!" A small explosion of reactions, her father's laugh, a sharp bark followed by a knee slap. Her mother's hand fluttering up to cover her mouth, not in shock, but in the kind of stifled giggle you'd expect from a schoolgirl hearing a dirty joke. A few guests laughed along, awkward and brittle. Others looked away, suddenly fascinated by their drinks. From where I stood, I had a perfect view of her sister's face. No tears, no protest. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that feels heavier than any outburst. Her eyes fixed on Savannah, but it was the absence of any reaction that made my chest ache. And then my phone buzzed in my hand. I'd accidentally hit the shutter mid-toast. On the screen was a frozen frame. Savannah's perfectly manicured finger extended, her champagne catching the light, her lips curled in a triumphant half-smile, and her sister in the background, holding a paper plate and standing very, very still. I took another without thinking, this time zoomed in slightly. Some part of me knew, even then, that this was more than just a party picture. It was evidence. She didn't say a word. No argument, no dramatic scene. Just a small nod to no one in particular and a quiet turn toward the house. For a second, I thought she was heading inside to regroup, maybe splash water on her face. My instinct was to follow, to say something. But before I could move, a guest I barely knew clapped a hand on my shoulder and launched into a story about his trip to Napa. His voice was a low, constant hum in my ear, and I couldn't break away without making it obvious I wasn't listening. From my position by the buffet, I had a clear view into the kitchen through the sliding glass doors. The catering staff moved briskly between counters, plating hors d'oeuvres. And there, in the corner, stood Savannah's mother, a glass of wine in hand. She wasn't looking at the food or the guests. She was watching the hallway, the one her younger daughter had just disappeared down, with a look that froze me in place. It wasn't indifference. It wasn't even irritation. It was satisfaction. A faint smile tugged at her lips, the kind you see on someone crossing off the last item on a to-do list. Then she turned back toward the room, lifting her glass toward a passing friend, as though nothing had happened. The music swelled again outside, the chatter rising in volume, but my eyes kept drifting to the house. And then I saw it. Through the narrow front window, a flash of movement. The unmistakable roll of a suitcase across the polished wooden floor. My stomach sank. She was leaving. Not just the party, but the house. It felt too fast, too final. And as the wheels of that suitcase clicked softly against the front steps, a thought lodged itself in my mind and refused to budge. I hadn't just witnessed an awkward family moment. I had just watched a public execution, and the audience had applauded. The party spilled on into the night, laughter and music still echoing behind me as I made my way to the car. My jacket smelled faintly of champagne I hadn't drunk, and my ears still rang with that single, sharp word, homeless. I didn't plan on taking the long way home, but the streets through the downtown district were quieter, easier to navigate. Storefronts slept behind darkened glass, their signs faintly lit. And that's when I saw it, a faded blue sedan parked crookedly along the curb, tucked in beside a 24-hour gym. It took me a second to place it. The mismatched hubcap, the dent in the rear bumper. It was hers. I slowed without thinking, my eyes scanning the windshield. Through the dim streetlight, I caught the silhouette in the driver's seat. Head tilted slightly forward, arms wrapped across her middle. She wasn't asleep so much as folded into herself. My hand hovered over the turn signal, a war inside me. Knock on the window? Offer a place to stay? Ask if she was okay? But my foot stayed on the brake, and in that quiet hesitation, another thought wormed in. Maybe she wouldn't want me to see her like this. Maybe showing up uninvited would just be another intrusion. Instead, I pulled out my phone and, without really knowing why, snapped a quick shot of her license plate and the street sign above it, a breadcrumb just in case. As I drove off, guilt pooled in my chest, thick and heavy. Less than an hour ago, her family had been parading in designer clothes under fairy lights, telling the world how perfect they were. And now, here she was, in the shadows, sleeping in the front seat of an aging sedan. The contrast wasn't just jarring, it was obscene. Winter had settled in by the time I saw her again. The kind of bitter cold that turns your breath into fog and your hands numb within minutes. I hadn't heard a word about her from anyone in the family. No casual updates, no whispers at holiday gatherings. It was as if she'd been erased. I was at the community library one Tuesday afternoon, returning a book I'd been using for work, when the automatic doors slid open behind me. She walked in, shaking the drizzle from her hair. Her coat was thrift store thin, still damp from the rain, and she clutched a worn folder to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Inside the folder, I could see the edges of printed resumes and cover letters. We recognized each other at the same time. Her eyes widened just slightly, then softened. She gave a small nod. Not quite a greeting, more of an acknowledgement that we were both still here. We ended up talking in the corner by the old newspaper archives. Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet fatigue under every word. She told me she'd spent the first few weeks after the party living out of her car until she found a women's shelter with an open bed. "It's not home," she said, adjusting the folder in her arms. "But it's safe. I work when I can. Delivery runs, warehouse shifts, whatever pays enough to keep me moving forward." I asked gently if her parents or Savannah had reached out. She gave me a look I still can't fully describe, somewhere between disbelief and resignation, and shook her head. Not once. There was more I wanted to say. About the photos on my phone. About that night, and the way the world deserved to see it. But instead, I just nodded, letting the weight of her words settle between us. Because in that moment, I knew the time wasn't right. The pictures were still in my gallery, buried among everyday snapshots. But they weren't forgotten. They were waiting. It started innocently, or at least that's what I told myself. A lazy evening, a cup of coffee going cold on the table, and my thumb idly scrolling through social media. Savannah's face was hard to avoid. She was everywhere. LinkedIn posts about breaking barriers for women in law, glossy blog articles on balancing ambition and empathy, perfectly filtered photos of her standing at podiums or shaking hands with other well-dressed professionals. At first, I barely read the captions, but then one caught my eye. A smiling group shot, Savannah front and center, arm around a woman in a shelter uniform. The caption, "So honored to be part of this campaign supporting our local homeless community. Everyone deserves dignity and a second chance." The irony hit like a punch. I stared at the image, the warm lighting, the casual hug, the carefully constructed kindness, and all I could see was that night in her parents' backyard. The champagne glass, the pointed finger, the word homeless hanging in the air like a verdict. Over the next few weeks, I found myself checking her pages more often. Not obsessively, but enough. Enough to see the patterns, the hashtags, the motivational quotes, the public persona so meticulously built, it could almost convince you she was exactly the kind of leader the world needed. And then I saw it. A bold banner across her LinkedIn profile. Honored to be nominated for the 2020 Ex-Women in Justice Award, recognizing young female leaders in law who exemplify integrity, leadership, and public impact. Integrity. Leadership. My thumb hovered over the screen, my pulse suddenly loud in my ears. I could almost hear the clink of her glass from that night, see the satisfaction in her mother's smile, feel the cold air of the driveway as her sister rolled that suitcase into the dark. In my mind, the photo on my phone came into focus. Savannah's finger outstretched, her smirk caught in perfect clarity. Until now, it had been proof of cruelty. But looking at that nomination, something shifted. It wasn't just proof anymore. It was a blade. I didn't decide in a burst of anger. It came slowly, over days, like water finding its way through stone. One evening, I cleared a corner of my desk and opened the photo folder I'd avoided for months. There they were, the two shots I'd taken that night without even thinking. In the first, Savannah's champagne glass caught the light, her finger extended like a judge delivering a sentence. In the second, her sister stood frozen, paper plate in hand, the party lights behind her like a cruel spotlight. I added one more piece, a screenshot from her own Instagram story the morning after, her caption floating over a filtered image of champagne flutes. "No room in your life for people who drag you down. protect your energy, even when they're family. The contrast was surgical. I printed them on glossy paper, each image crisp enough to make anyone feel the bite of that moment. Then I wrote a single line on plain white stationery. No signature, no sender's address. This is how she treats the homeless, her own sister. 2 large manila envelopes, one addressed to the Women in Justice Award Committee, the other to the event's keynote speaker, a woman renowned for mentoring young female attorneys and advocating for marginalized communities. The packages went out by express mail the next morning. As I dropped them into the slot, I felt the kind of stillness you get before a storm. Not excitement, not fear, just a quiet certainty. I didn't tell her. She didn't need to know, not yet, because this wasn't about dragging her into a fight she didn't ask for. This was about letting her see, with her own eyes, what happens when truth finds its way into the light. The gala was held in one of those glass-walled event spaces downtown, the kind designed to impress from every angle. From across the street, I could see the chandeliers spilling light onto the rooftop terrace, the silhouettes of guests moving like figures in a music box. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. Instead, I sat in a corner booth at a small cafe opposite the venue, nursing a lukewarm coffee. Through the wide front windows, I had a perfect view of the grand entrance. Savannah arrived just after 8. Even from here, I could see the gleam of her emerald satin gown under the street lamps, the confident tilt of her chin, the kind of smile you wear when you've already rehearsed your acceptance speech. Cameras flashed, people leaned in to greet her, and she moved through it all as if she belonged to that world completely. Inside, the lights dimmed. I watched through the glass as the MC stepped up to the podium. His voice carried faintly through the cafe's open door. "Before we continue," he said, "our committee would like to acknowledge the importance of integrity in legal leadership. Tonight, we have made the decision to withdraw one finalist due to concerns brought to our attention." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. I saw it land. The way Savannah's smile froze mid-breath, the muscles in her shoulders stiffening. Her gaze flicked around the room, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. The woman seated beside her glanced down at her phone, frowned, and then shifted slightly away. By the time the next category was announced, she was clapping on autopilot, her eyes fixed on some point far away. The fallout was faster than I'd expected. Before the night was over, the Women in Justice social page had posted an official statement. "We have rescinded the nomination of one finalist after learning of an incident that contradicts the values of our award. Humiliation, cruelty, and weaponizing homelessness, especially within one's own family, cannot be celebrated as leadership." The post spread like wildfire. By morning, her professional profiles were swarmed with comments. "Was this you? Care to explain?" Screenshots of the photos appeared on forums, stitched into TikToks, whispered into group chats. And I was still sitting in the same cafe booth, coffee cold, watching the light drain from her face in my mind's eye. The stage hadn't just collapsed. It had been pulled out from under her, quietly, deliberately, and without me ever stepping into the room. The unraveling didn't take long. Within 48 hours, Savannah's Instagram vanished. Her blog was replaced with a blank landing page. LinkedIn went private. But the internet has a memory, and screenshots kept circulating. The champagne glass, the pointed finger, the caption that had once been a boast, now serving as an indictment. Her parents tried to stay silent, but that silence didn't last. A local community forum picked up the award committee statement, and soon someone posted about how the whole family laughed. Threads filled with neighbors' stories, small glimpses of similar moments over the years. Words like enablers and toxic began to stick. And somewhere in the middle of that storm, she, the younger sister, quietly stepped into a new chapter. I found out by accident. A passing mention in conversation with a librarian led to me learning she'd moved into a small studio apartment, freshly painted, paid for with her own savings from a full-time position at a logistics firm. She was no longer just surviving. She was standing on her own ground. That evening, I typed her a short message. No explanations, no confessions, just, "Congratulations. You made it." Attached was a photo I'd taken on the night of the gala. Not of her, not of Savannah, but of the city sky, clear after a day of rain. A quiet signal. The storm had passed. She replied a few hours later. "Thank you. Nothing more, nothing less, and it was enough." Because this was never about applause. Their family lost the image they had fought to preserve. She found herself again. And me? I just kept a few photographs, and the memory of a moment when silent justice rang louder than any cheer.